I'll call the meeting to order. If I could get a roll call, please.
Mr. Ackerson?
Here.
Ms. Billman? Here. Mr. Fell? Here. Mr. Fitch?
Here.
Mr. Hopkins? Here. Ms. Drago? Mr. Trail?
Here.
Mr. Turner?
Here.
And Ms. Yu?
Here.
We have a quorum. Are there any changes to the agenda? We have approval of the minutes. We have minutes from the April 5th, 2018 regular meeting and the April 5th, 2018 special meeting. I am not opposed to moving these at the same time. Moved by Mr. Turner, second by Mr. Trail. Any changes to the minutes? We'll have a voice vote on these. All those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? The minutes are approved. Do we have any communications? We do not. Continued public hearings. We have Plan Case 2331T18, a request by the Urbana Zoning Administrator to amend the Urbana Zoning Ordinance to modify who may submit an application for various permits and approvals. This case is continued to the May 10th, 2018 Plan Commission meeting. Plan Case 2339T18, an application by the Zoning Administrator to amend the zoning ordinance to combine the Mixed Office Residential MOR Development Review Board and a Design Review Board. Ms. Pearson.
Thank you. So the exhibit to your memo is very lengthy and looks like there are a lot of changes in it. It's really just a matter of combining two different sections, so I'm going to try to walk you through it, but there's not a whole lot of changes per se, significant changes. It just looks like a lot. So I just wanted to preface my, my statements with we're not going to be here all night with this, I wouldn't imagine, at least my part of it. So what's before you tonight is a text amendment that would combine two of our existing boards. The first one is called the Mixed Office Residential Development Review Board, and the other one is called the Design Review Board. So each of these boards have different responsibilities. The MOR Development Review Board is in charge of reviewing redevelopment projects that are in the actual zoning district of MOR, and that here is shown in these light blue, mostly around Green Street, Elm Street, and there's a couple of parcels along Race. The Design Review Board, on the other hand, is, oh, well, this gets cut off, but anyway, it is for a couple of different sections that they review development projects for. The one that's shown on your screen in part is the Lincoln-Busey Corridor Overlay District. Basically, the two streets which would be really helpful if they were labeled. Lincoln here on the left, Busey on the right. It goes up to Illinois and then down to Pennsylvania, if I'm remembering correctly. Then the Design Review Board is also responsible for looking at projects within the East Urbana Design Overlay District. They each have different names, so I apologize if I'm hesitating. And here this is in East Urbana, of course, not too far from where we're currently sitting. So each of these boards were set up at different times. I've got a brief history in your memo, but in essence, the MOR Development Review Board has been in existence in some capacity since 1991. It was significantly changed in 2003 to be an appointed board that has 7 members. The Design Review Board, also with 7 members, was created in 2009, first to address that Lincoln-Busey corridor, and then it was expanded. The purview of the board was expanded in 2010 to address the East Urbana Design Overlay District. So there's a lot of similarities between each of these boards. So in some ways, the combination was really simple. Where things are different, I'll point those out a little bit and how we dealt with them in the text. So the reason we're talking about this is twofold. Over the years, both of the boards have expressed an interest in combining them. They do share a few members, which I'll get into in a moment. And I've also been given mayoral direction to combine these boards. So that is why I am before you tonight with this text amendment. So the major piece that we needed to address was the membership of the board. That's probably one of the more significant changes that we're proposing here today. As I mentioned, each board currently has 7 members, and 4 of them are the same. They represent categories, and those 4 categories are a member from this body, a member from the Historic Preservation Commission, an architect, and a local developer. Now, where they differ are on the 3 additional members. The Design Review Board, for instance, then has 3 residents from Urbana, depending on how many overlay districts there are that they have purview over. In this case, there are 2 overlay districts, so there are 2 residents from Urbana, 1 from each of those districts that are represented, and the third one is a bit of an at-large position. And that's a bit more distinct from the Mixed Office Residential Development Review Board, in that those 3 extra members have different, they're supposed to represent different different individuals or different groups, rather. So one is an owner-occupant of property within the district itself. One is, or a second category is a resident living within, inside that district or within 250 feet. And finally, the third category for MOR is an owner of a small local business with fewer than 40 employees. So rather than creating a board that has all of those folks in it, which might not actually fit around this dais, we are proposing a board, again, of just 7 members, but with an addition of something that we haven't done a lot here in Urbana, at least, and that is to appoint 2 alternate members. And what that means is that if a regular member cannot attend or has to recuse themselves for a particular issue, then that alternate member can participate. So what that does is it really helps us with quorum, because some of these other boards, we have a hard time getting all of the seats filled on every single meeting. So having those alternate members sort of as backups really would help to make sure that we have quorum and that we can schedule meetings and review these applications in a timely fashion. So in terms of the makeup then of that board as it's currently proposed, it would still have those 4 members that represent different categories today that are on each of the boards. So somebody from this board, or this commission rather, somebody from Historic Preservation, an architect, and a developer. And then the 3 individuals would represent different groups, much like as it is today. So somebody would represent the MOR district, somebody would represent the Lincoln-Busey district, and somebody would represent East Urbana, or someone could represent an owner of a local business with fewer than 40 employees. So you can see, if you're following along in your memo, this is on page 2 toward the bottom. Those categories are under number 5, where it's suggesting 3 individuals are selected from these 4 categories. So that gets you a total of 7 members, regular members. And then what you can then do is have 2 alternate members, and you pick from those other categories. And you try to make it so that it's representative and you don't have all of your alternate members from a category that's already represented, for instance. So I did bring this to the boards in a joint meeting earlier this year, and we talked about this a bit, and everyone seemed pretty satisfied that it was representative. What this structure does is it allows everyone that's currently sitting on the boards to continue to participate in some fashion, whether as a regular member or as an alternate member. So it seemed like a fair way to do things, to still get good representation without having an unwieldy number of folks, and also to encourage quorum by having that alternate member category. So that summarizes the membership. Do you want me to stop there to take questions on that part? Because that could get a little complicated, or should I just keep on rolling?
So why stay with 7 instead of going to 7 plus 2 alternates as opposed to just going to 9?
Well, despite the number of folks on this particular commission, 7 is kind of a magic number for boards. And that also means that to make quorum, you only need 4 people instead of 5. So that's also helpful. Because these boards in particular, they don't meet very often. People aren't used to coming, so quorum has often been an issue.
Sorry. I was actually thinking about quorum. So you think having the 2 alternates helps you more than making it larger?
Yes, because they don't
Because
count toward quorum unless they're participating.
Okay.
I have another question on that. Is the intention for each of the 3 individuals to represent a different one of the 4?
Yes, and if we want to turn to the actual language, because that was a
Yeah, that's
discussion
on
point.
page 5 of the memo. Page 5
Page 5 of the exhibit.
Of the exhibit, yes.
Because I would welcome suggestions on if this language needs to be clarified to make that, to make sure that's clear. That is the intent. So if I haven't achieved that, I want you to tell me so that I can be sure to fix that.
Mr. Fell?
I don't have this in front of me, but does this board makeup, how's it worded? Does it say it's made up of a developer, a whatever?
That is how it is currently
Okay,
written.
So what if two developers want to be on there? Right now, our language says we can only have one.
To represent that category. So if a developer were to live inside that district or within 250 feet of that district, then they could represent that group and if they fit that category.
Okay. So you don't think that's limiting, just as, I mean, it's a sort of a minor point, but,
Well, I think the idea of this original makeup was to have a balance between residents and those that represent the different
Okay.
categories, like developer
Okay.
and architect.
follow-up, sort of? Not that I'm speaking about myself, but can an architect from the ETJ be a member of that board?
Well, with the exception of the commissioners, so those two categories of architect and developer are not limited to Urbana residencies.
Okay.
Anything further at this time? Mr. Turner?
They are called on an as-needed basis. They have one meeting a year as an annual meeting, but then they are called when there are cases to review. So I don't have the numbers in front of me exactly, but it might be once a year, it might be 0 times a year, it might be 3 to 4 times a year.
Yeah.
Are you looking to change jobs?
He changed boards. Mr. Trail?
It seems a little strange to me to have this mandatory makeup of, what do you do if you can't find a developer who wants to be on the board? And this idea that you're going to get some kind of balance, has historically that been successful by doing this?
Well, I will say that the challenge in filling these boards historically has not been with those 4 members that remain the same, the category members, the architect, the developer, or members from the other boards, but it has been the residents. Because some of these, well, as it's currently written in the design review board, for instance, you have to actually live within that district, and sometimes we had a hard time finding somebody, to be honest.
That may be an indication that these are kind of small?
Well, and that's why in the
Districts.
proposed, what we're suggesting is not only can you live within there, but also if you live within 250 feet, so basically a block within there, that language is borrowed from how the MOR district does it, which the category is lives in or within that radius. So the idea is to make sure there's representation from somebody in the actual neighborhood so that they have a good idea on the character and the feel of the architecture and how the building should sit in on a property, so that they are able to participate and really try to represent the neighborhood.
I feel, what's the purpose of all these districts? Do they all have the same purpose?
Not exactly, because of the guidelines for each are different. So, I mean, I could read you each of the purposes specifically, but in general, the idea is that redevelopment projects that have, I mean, we're just talking exterior here, and in many cases, we're just talking new buildings or major additions, that they have a review process so that one can ensure that the design that goes forward is compatible with the neighborhood and the guidelines.
But that's kind of the mechanics of it, but why were these created in the first place?
That would be a whole other presentation, which if you need more background, I can bring that for you, but I apologize, I wasn't prepared on all of the genesis of each of these, because they are fairly lengthy. MOR in particular, as I said, was started in 1991 and had significant changes in 2003. But sometimes these districts were created because they're a project that was proposed and was constructed because there wasn't a design review that didn't fit with the neighborhood, and that created a reaction to develop some of the rules and some of the guidelines. So sometimes it was because a project or two created a negative reaction. Other times, perhaps it was just recognizing that maybe there was the possibility of properties that could be torn down and built with something else that might not quite fit.
The sort of gist of my issue here is these overlay districts are a tool to achieve something, right? And this tool's been implemented in a particular way. And now we're going to combine them into, I guess, in some sense, a more powerful version of the tool. Has it been working? I mean, what
Well-
are the goals of the reason in these overlay districts were created are compatible enough that it makes sense to combine it?
Well, I guess I'll get into that a little bit more when I'm talking about some of the other changes. So basically, nothing underlying in any of these, either the zoning district or the overlay district, is changing. It's just a matter of how things are administered. Instead of two different boards reviewing the projects, it would be one group. So it's not as though their power has changed, because it's, well, four of the folks would be the same, so they would review both projects anyway. So it's just a matter of getting representation, changing the makeup a little bit of the other representatives on the board, but it's not changing what kinds of projects they review or the guidelines that they have to base their decisions on. It's just a matter of how things are operating and the procedures that are in place, and instead of having two sets of people doing that, it's one set.
But the primary reason we're here is because it's difficult to get a quorum?
The primary reason that I'm here is because I have mayoral direction to combine these boards.
All right,
And
I'll
each board
rephrase
did
the-
ask.
I'll rephrase the question. Is the primary reason this change is being proposed is because there's difficulty getting a quorum?
I would probably have to go back to the minutes from when the combination of the boards was discussed by both of the boards, because I wasn't here for those meetings where they had those discussions. But certainly that would be a benefit from, I think, staff standpoint, where we have to administer these boards and there is a quorum issue, or we can't find a meeting time that people can make. So there is an efficiency issue here with having multiple boards and filling those and keeping track of the vacancies and keeping track of when terms expire and renewing all of those. So having one board would increase efficiency from, just a procedural standpoint. I'm guessing that a lot of the members of the boards, when they talked about it and wanted to combine, probably kind of thought it would be simpler rather than saying, okay, now which meeting am I going to? And wait, now I've got a joint meeting and this is complicated. So it seems like it would be a lot easier from a procedural standpoint to have just one board, and like I said, would increase the efficiencies of our operations.
I guess my initial reaction is
If you're going to start discussion, we can hold it unless you have more questions.
Could I finish my presentation?
yeah, I'll let you finish your presentation.
Right, absolutely.
Okay. I didn't want you to call it before
No,
I
no.
kind of got through the
No, I wasn't
the bulk of
trying
it.
to do
Okay.
that.
All right, so I touched on membership. Now, those are probably the more significant changes. So basically, for the rest of it, what I did was I took the main section where most of the MOR rules were, and I took everything that was in the design review board section, and I smooshed them together. In most cases, they overlaid, no pun intended, really well, because they were basically identical. Now, where things were different, like the MOR board should be reviewing for X, Y, and Z, and the DRB should be reviewing for A, B, and C, I made sure to distinguish. MOR, you do this. Well, the design review board, when you're looking at MOR projects, you do this, and the design review board, when you're looking at the other projects, you do these things. So tried to keep things distinct where they needed to be distinct, but combined them where they were the same. So I did want to point out just a few deviations from that, and those would be, so for those of you intimately aware of our zoning ordinance, you may know that as it currently stands, the MOR district has this standalone section really early on in the ordinance that is totally separate from where the bulk of the regulations for MOR are listed. I don't know why. So we decided, for ease of everyone reading this thing, so that they don't miss that standalone section, let's take those pieces and put it all together. So that, those changes are reflected in what used to be Section 5-8. They now appear in the new sections under Article 12, Article 11, Section 12, paragraphs H, I, J, and K. So nothing is changing except for the location. A real minor change here, as it's currently written, the Development Review Board required a chair and a vice chair, but the Design Review Board didn't require a vice chair, so I think it's a good idea to have a vice chair, so we're proposing that they have a vice chair for the new board. Then another reorganization that is proposed here is, as it's written today for both boards, one is supposed to submit an application, and then staff, in conjunction with the chair of the boards, determines whether or not that application is exempt or should even be submitted. So technically, you should submit a full application if you're, doing an interior renovation, so that we can then say, well, that's an exempt project, of course. Silly, why did you submit this application? So what we're proposing here is a change in the order so that the exemption is determined before they go through the expense of submitting a totally irrelevant application. So I just wanted to point that out. It's not that we're changing what's exempt, it's that we're changing when that determination is made. However, there is a change shown, and I want to make sure that everyone is aware of that, because it's probably one of the most significant changes, and that is in the new section, it's paragraph G2, and it's solely about the East Urbana Design Review Overlay District. So, and it's about the exemptions. Now, I was struck when I was looking in, preparing this ordinance change, I of course was looking at all of the design guidelines, and I was struck by how many times the design guidelines for the East Urbana Design Overlay District reference that single-family home, single-family residents were exempt from these rules. However, that language never made it into the zoning ordinance. Now, guidelines are guidelines, they're not the rule of law. The zoning ordinance is the rule of law. So if one were to do some work on a single-family home, they would probably point to the guidelines and say, but look, I'm exempt. But I would have to point to the zoning ordinance and say, you're not listed as exempt. So there's a conflict there that we wanted to clear up with this change. So that is a change to the content that I wanted to point out. And because I constantly review these things, I just noticed today that there is another exemption in the East Urbana Design Guidelines that, if you think it's appropriate, I would like you to consider as a further exemption in that same paragraph. It's not mentioned nearly as many times in the design guidelines, but under exempt projects, it lists not only projects involving single-family residences, projects requiring no building permit, involving no exterior construction, but it also lists projects involving existing and proposed local historic landmarks and properties within existing and proposed local historic districts. It would make sense those would be exempt because there is an entirely different review process for that. So if you find it appropriate, I would like to amend our text amendment to add that that language that's straight out of the guidelines as an exemption only for projects within the East Urbana Overlay District, because it was pretty clear in the guidelines. So in trying to figure out the intent of those exemptions, I did go back and I looked at the minutes and the old memos from when the district was created and the zoning ordinance text was created, and it clearly stated during the Plan Commission meeting that single-family homes would be exempt. But then the language just didn't change other than to add East Urbana to that section. It didn't touch language other than to say, we are establishing the East Urbana Overlay District, and here's the map of it. End of story. And here are the guidelines. So I'm not sure if it was just an oversight or what, but it seems like we could get in some trouble down the road if we don't clarify that and put that as the intent in the ordinance rather than relying just on the guidelines. All right, so I think I covered the changes. And like I said at the beginning, I mean, it does look like a lot of changes, but everything is still in there. It's just a matter of reorganizing it a bit, except for where I pointed out where there were significant changes. So with that, I conclude my presentation, other than to ask for your recommendation for approval.
Any further questions for Ms. Pearson? Mr. Hopkins?
Because I don't have some things in front of me. There are no spatial overlaps among the three districts, yes, no?
That is correct. They do not overlap in any way.
Okay. In your proposed amendment to the amendment, it refers to proposed historic landmarks?
Yeah, maybe
What
that
does
shouldn't
that
be in there.
mean?
That probably shouldn't be in there. I mean,
We
for,
don't know what it means
Exactly.
unless we can define it some other way, so I suggest that not be included.
yeah, I would agree with that. Thank you.
Any further questions? Ms. Billman?
What is the difference between a board and a commission?
That's a good question. I don't know.
I get to ask the metaphysical question.
Anything further? No? Thank you very much. Okay, discussion? Suggestions?
Public input?
Public input? Public input? Great. Any thoughts? Huh? How about a motion?
I move we send client case 2339 T18 to council with recommendation for approval with the addition of the East Urbana portions to the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Hopkins.
I'm assuming that you've got them in writing. Is that-
I wrote it down, so we can
Okay.
clarify that.
Okay.
Second by Mr. Turner. Further discussion? Mr. Trail, you had some questions that, about what's the purpose of these and so on and so forth?
I'm starting to reconsider whether it makes any difference or not.
Well, it's an interesting question, and I think we were both, when we created Lincoln Busey and East Urbana, not with the MOR, but essentially it's to preserve the character of the neighborhoods by making sure that new developments are compatible from
Or
a design
non-existent.
standpoint. Huh?
Or non-existent.
Well, it hasn't stopped development on Green Street. It just changes the way they look.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Now, I think in Lincoln Busey, you saw what happened when somebody tried to do something there recently, and it has a different effect there, I think. Back here, there haven't been any cases. It only applies to the multifamily dwellings, so.
It kind of gets to my, sort of seems to me the major problem we're trying to solve is they can't get enough people to show up at the meetings. And it sounds like they have few meetings. I'm not sure, I mean, unless the intent is literally to not have anything happen in those areas, can you say that this approach and the overlay districts themselves have been successful, or is this a sign that maybe some other direction needs to be taken?
Well, I think it's an interesting question. I don't think it's the question that we're going to vote on tonight.
Well,
we
it
had
is.
there was a lot of,
It is.
A lot of,
Because in essence, by voting for this, we're voting to paper over the problems, at least temporarily, to alleviate the fact that they can't get enough people to show up at meetings. But it doesn't address perhaps the underlying problem. Maybe the districts are too small, maybe they're, I don't know.
I think all of that could be true, but for me, this is an administrative change only. And there was a lot of discussion leading up to both of these, or all three of them, I assume. And there's been, that question you've asked has been asked, and I can't answer it straight out. We done?
I think I've been told I'm done, yeah.
Yeah. Mr. Hopkins? No? Ms. Billman?
Is there a downside to this?
I don't know. I guess I'd ask city staff to weigh in on that. I think you'd have to understand the rules of all three districts, which are different. Right now, if you're on the MRR board, that's purely your focus. If you're on the design review board, you have to understand two districts. Now, the design review guidelines for East Urbana are very minimal. It's not hard to understand. Lincoln Busey is pretty much more complicated, I think, it's fair to say. And MOR is as well.
You have been on.
I've not been on those boards,
Oh.
no, no.
I probably should have asked Lori this, but do the members of the boards want this change?
They had discussed it at 2 of their previous annual meetings, and yes. The answer was yes. And when I discussed it, so I brought the membership changes to them at their meetings, a joint special meeting in January, and there was no discussion on whether or not it should happen, just discussion on the specifics on, making sure we get the language right to have a broad representation.
Mr. Turner?
Just to David's point, who does review, or how does it happen that a review could happen to see if this is effective, is working how it should be? Does that come to us at some point, or how would that happen? I'm just curious, because it's a good point.
Well, I suppose it could come through as a mayoral and city council priority. So they recently set their priorities for 2018 to 2021, I believe. So something like that would be a fairly significant project to do. I think it would be much like creating each of them, but looking at them all at once. And the thought of doing that, frankly, frightens me right now with our workload, because development is picking up. So maybe I want to get back to you on that, but I do think that since it is such a significant undertaking to really open everything back up and do a thorough analysis, that we'd probably need some mayoral direction on that one.
And that makes sense. I'm just curious about kind of the assessment parts of things. But
Mr. Ackerson?
I was just going to say, speaking not from the purpose of the reviews boards, but just looking at this as an administrative change, I think any time you can look at creating greater efficiency, combining commissions, committees, whatever, is a good thing if something important is not lost. And so I think there is a good question about, is lack of attendance mean it's one, does anybody care about what's going on? I think Lincoln Busey, we've seen the effects in this group that people do care about that one. But if it's hard to get citizens involved, I mean, part of it may be, do they care? But the other point is, are these so small that they only affect a small group of people? That's another argument, though, for combining all of these under one body that's going to look at them. Even though they have different rules, it makes more sense to have one body that's consistently looking at this, I think. So it's part of the quorum problem, I think, is too many committees, too many commissions trying to do too little.
Anything further? I just want to clarify that there's another one of these things that this board does not apply to, and that's the one we approved in June, which was the Silverwater Southeast Urbana with the crime control through design or some such. But just to be clear, it specifically says just these three boards. And my recollection is that that process is a special use permit process.
Yes, that's
So we
correct.
would in effect be the design review board. It's like, that would be sort of like what we're doing. So, anything further? Mr. Fell?
One comment, thank you for putting alternates on the board, because as a professional that does this, there are times when we've needed to have a meeting to get a project done, and we can't get a quorum for 2 months. So now, a developer has a project that wasn't delayed 2 months, it's delayed a year. So alternates are a great idea, so thank you.
Great. Anything further? In that case, we'll have a roll call, please. Oh, before we do that, do we want to clarify the language that we want in regard to East Urbana? Just so it's on the record. What I wrote down, excuse me, shall be exempt from design review if it is a historic landmark or a property in a historic district,
I would be sure to say local historic landmark
local historic landmark.
or property within a local historic district.
Sounds good. So the motion is to, is on this proposal with that amendment. Okay, now we can do a roll call.
Ms. Gilman,
Yes.
Mr. Fell,
Yes.
Mr. Fitch,
Yes.
Mr. Hopkins,
Yes.
Mr. Trail, Mr. Turner,
Yes.
Ms. Yu,
Yes.
and Mr. Ackerson.
Yes.
That motion passes. Do we have a date for city council?
Because we need to also bring at the same time members to fill this board, it might not be at their next meeting on May 7th. We might need a little bit extra time to do the bylaws and get some more
Okay.
volunteers. So stay tuned.
Great, thank you. Okay, we don't have any old business. We don't have any new public hearings. We don't have any new business. Audience participation, second chance? No. Staff report.
I just wanted to touch on a couple things from the Citizen Planner Workshop last week. Thank you to those that could attend. It was really well attended from folks from throughout the county, so that was good. So a couple of things that kind of struck me that I wanted to reiterate, and if I, provided the chair's okay with it, if anyone else that was there wants to weigh in or pop up with another idea, I'm sure he would be willing to allow me to amend my staff report to include their comments.
Perhaps.
We'll see. So it did talk a little bit, there was a sort of a Planning 101 review at the beginning, so just your basics that I think all of you are pretty well versed in, and comprehensive planning and zoning ordinance and zoning maps and whatnot. But one thing that the presenters did point out is how important it is to have an up-to-date comprehensive plan. And so thankfully they didn't ask us how old ours was directly, because I don't know that ours would be considered up to date. It's from 2005. So guess that's just a plug on my end to let you know that hopefully we can tackle that in the somewhat near future. But the presentations then touched a bit on the different types of cases and how they each rely on a different set of standards or criteria, and how important it is for the commission to discuss those criteria during their deliberations, and particularly how important it is to point that out, that these standards or criteria or findings of fact are met when you're making the motion. So I just wanted to stress that I'm not the only one that thinks that's important, others do too. So thank you when you make a point to really talk a little bit about the standards and the criteria, because it does help build a case should it ever need to go to court. And let's see, they also talked a little bit, there are questions from the audience, of course, so they talked a little bit about avoiding conflicts of interest by making sure you're not having conversations with applicants, for instance, and I know none of you do that, so thank you, and I know you're all really good at when you get an email from somebody, you forward it to staff so that we can distribute it to everybody. The idea there is that everybody needs to have the same information so that you can make a decision based on that same information. So those are really the things that I noted that I wanted to highlight, but I don't know if anyone else that was there remembers anything that was good. I mean, the meal was good.
Who did attend?
I just really want to say that on my orientation with you, we talked a lot about conflict of interest. I think you did a really good job to
thank
bring
you.
me on board because basically everything they covered, you covered it with me. So
And I wasn't charged. I mean, I don't charge, so there you go. That's even better.
Yeah, but you didn't give her a meal.
Yeah, that's true, sorry.
Anybody, other thoughts or?
I just wondered how this is paid.
So the
The
Regional
taxpayers.
Planning Commission, is a dues-based group
Oh.
within the county. So each of the jurisdictions pays dues to the Regional Planning Commission. So it would come out of those dues. And what they do with their dues are provide services to us as organizations. So they have not only trainings for boards and commissions members, but also they have different staff trainings on things that we need to know as well. So that's where it comes out of.
I would say I would reiterate the idea that, of us looking at the findings of fact, certainly, in the various cases and really discussing some of those things. I felt that the training got a little sidetracked, by some special interests here and there, every so often, and it wasn't focused just on the training aspect of that, and I don't need to evaluate the right, here. But, I thought that unfortunately because of that, it didn't get through as much coverage as what they had hoped for. But overall, I thought it was good, and I think that the last one we did was maybe 3 years ago, in that sort. And it's just kind of a nice touch point for people on the planning commission who don't have a planning background at all, maybe something.
Well, some do.
Yeah, some do. But not me, I work in higher ed every day, to have kind of a different vantage point and perspective. So I appreciate some of those types of things and things. So,
Well, it's true, there is no planning in higher ed, so. I understand, other than in the department you came from.
Lots of planning in higher ed and higher ed.
Planning is in my title, so yeah. It's a joke.
I have been strategic plan to do
Yeah,
that.
exactly, yeah, yeah.
so thank you. Thanks to the regional planning board.
Great, anything further on that?
So,
Mr. Hopkins?
I don't really want to get into a discussion, but as I recall, when we redid our bylaws, we have in there a statement about our practice with regard to findings of fact and basis. Because we operate, I can't remember the Illinois legislative, we are not formally quasi-judicial in Illinois, as I recall.
That's also my recollection.
So, the restrictions on findings of fact, the way we can, I believe, in Illinois operate, and by tradition have operated on this board. And I say by tradition, not meaning it's the only way or the right way. That we explicitly do not state findings of fact in our motions. And I was thinking that we put in our revised bylaws that the basis, something like the basis of decisions are constituted by the staff
Staff memo,
report
yeah.
and the deliberations of the meeting. Am I?
I don't have the bylaws, the new ones with me. Certainly, by tradition, you're right, that's, every once in a while.
And it's, I only bring it up because it often becomes an issue every time we have somebody from the outside come talk to us. Because we don't behave to the standard that some people think we should. So I'll look at it, I mean, I don't really, as I said, I don't really want to get into it.
Well, you guys just, but we revise the bylaws in December, I think. They come around every year, so
Well, yeah, but well, anyway, I thought I had them, but I don't.
I usually do. I
Anyway,
don't have them.
end of comment.
Okay. Anything further on this? Okay, well, we don't have a study session, and therefore we are adjourned.